David Gordon Green's Halloween trilogy is a very disjointed experience. The 2018 Halloween reboot is far and away the most successful film financially in that franchise, and Halloween Kills was not received well either at the box office or critically. That said, this film is very likely our last time seeing Jamie Lee Curtis in the role that launched her career, and the ending of one of my favorite horror franchises, with Halloween Ends. Hi, I'm Matt Kime, and welcome back to Full Stop Reviews. Hi, welcome back to the channel. Remember, give us a like, comment, subscribe. Happy holiday season. Halloween Ends is directed by David Gordon Green and stars Jamie Lee Curtis, Rohan Campbell, Andy Matichak, and James Jude Courtney. Now, I'm going to do two halves of this video. There's going to be a spoiler section, and I will put up time codes and descriptions and all that. And so I'm gonna try and not spoil the movie for the first few minutes that I talk about it. It's kind of hard because the most pointed things that I have to say about the movie kind of involve talking about the plot, which the marketing for this movie really hasn't been very upfront with. You could even go so far as to call it a bit of a bait and switch, but we'll get to that. I enjoyed the Halloween reboot for what it was, and I enjoyed that it presented a somewhat fresh take on the Michael Myers character by completely throwing out some very key pieces of the entire backstory, the lore, the mythos, all of it, boom, gone out the window, and kind of went just back to the original philosophy behind what John Carpenter wanted with Michael Myers, where he's just this kind of face of unrelenting, unreasonable evil. That it doesn't matter who's behind that mask, there's just nothing behind the mask. There's nothing behind those eyes, and he's just a killing machine. And especially that first movie used that idea in a very successful way. This movie is billed up as the final confrontation between longtime star Jamie Lee Curtis and Michael Myers. This movie's kind of hard to talk about because it feels like it feels like what was billed as the culmination of a 40-year-long battle between these two characters. They completely get sidelined in favor of a completely different storyline that eats up probably 70 to 80% of the runtime. But that storyline wraps up, and then we go back to the storyline we thought we were going to get. But by that point, there's only 10 minutes left in the movie, and the main storyline we've been following doesn't get acknowledged ever again. So it's a very bizarrely put together film. It almost feels like there's two different ideas from two different scripts that, in order to get one made, they had to fold it into another. Result is something kind of disjointed. Like, there's a lot of good idea in this movie. The follow-through on both, I guess, story threads this movie presents is weak because it can't pick a lane, or the lane that it picks is not the lane that it stays in. And even if it had stayed in that lane, it wouldn't probably not have been the most advisable of directions to go, just because is that direction really how you want to spend the last part of your trilogy? Like, even Andy Matichak, Jamie Lee Curtis's granddaughter in this film, as Allyson, she was a major character in the first two, and she completely gets sidelined. And so it's bizarre to see her and Laurie, and hell, even Michael Myers get sidelined to the extent that they do. It's very jarring, and I understand what the producers of this movie were going for. I understand why they made some of these decisions. I just don't think it paid off the way they wanted it to. That said, there's a lot of good moments of tension. The opening scene of this grabs you in a way that you weren't expecting and introduces a very intriguing story idea that kind of, unfortunately, takes over the rest of the film. So this movie has good ideas and good moments, and there's a couple of really good performances, and Jamie Lee Curtis just brings a gravitas to the role that slashers don't normally have. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of stupid slasher moments, because of course there are. I'm really not sure what to think of this movie. A lot of people really don't like it, and a lot of people are just kind of lukewarm on it. I think I fall into that category. This movie, full disclosure, I did not like Halloween Kills. I really did not enjoy that movie. I thought the way that certain characters and situations were portrayed were contrived, unearned, and just cartoonish even by Halloween slasher standards. This movie is certainly better than that, but there's a lot here that just feels so out of place that it's just jarring. And so as a result, I'm going to give this movie a yellow light. I don't really have too much more to say without spoiling, so if you still want to see the movie, and if you still are intrigued by seeing the movie and you want to see it, stop this video now and go enjoy it. Go form your own opinion. Okay, spoiler section of the review. There's really two story threads being followed here in this film. The first is around the Rohan Campbell character, Corey Cunningham, and the second revolves around Michael Myers and Laurie and her granddaughter. And they kind of feel very, very disparate. Yeah, I think it's 4 years have passed since the ending of Halloween Kills, which took place on the same night as Halloween 2018. Michael Myers is barely in this movie. The one piece of bias that I came into this movie with is that I knew he was going to be in this movie less than we thought he might, so I kept a timer on I kept like a little stopwatch on my phone when I was watching this. You do not see Michael Myers for the first time outside of a voiceover flashback thing from Laurie at the beginning of the film. You do not see him until the 41-minute mark in the film. Even for some of the previous Halloween films, like, one of the reasons why the original Halloween film is so good is that it takes its time to build things up. So even if he's not, like, directly in the scene, he's kind of, like, driving a car very slowly in the background or something. There's none of that there. So a lot of the tension building that made this franchise, even in some of the sequels, so successful, it just isn't there. Instead, this movie kind of goes all in on being a character piece. And that's a very, very bold choice for these filmmakers to make. We have this character who kind of at the beginning of the film, you see him accidentally kill a kid, and so everybody kind of defines him that, and they paint him as this, like, the next boogeyman, and he gets treated accordingly. His parents hate him. Nobody outside of, like, a mechanic shop outside of town will hire him. He was gonna go to school. He's not doing that now. And he's generally just kind of a loner outsider type. And so we're following him. All of his actions drive the plot to the story. Not Michael, not Laurie, not Allyson. His decisions. So he's really the protagonist of the film, even though he's not, like, he falls into the, like, anti-hero villain protagonist archetype, I guess. And so it's a very, very weird dichotomy where the movie's not even about Michael Myers at the end of the day. It's about him. But, and again, remember, this is the spoiler section. He dies, and then the movie goes on for another 15 minutes. It's the strangest thing, because it's like he dies, and then Michael and Laurie have their final confrontation. It just feels so kind of underwhelming, even though the fight itself is great. And you can make the argument that the previous two films built this up. The second movie especially made a whole point that Michael doesn't even see Laurie as anything, just as another victim, and she doesn't matter that much to him in the long run of things. And you see this where you see them play around with this idea. It's the whole concept of maybe I'm just saying this because I've been watching Andor recently, but it's the whole concept of the axe forgets. The axe chops down so many trees that it just forgets each individual one that it's forgotten, but the tree doesn't. And so that was kind of like the relationship between Michael and Laurie, but there was still a build-up and a very serious emotional underpinning there. But Laurie almost does nothing in this film. And her granddaughter character, Allyson, has it even worse. She was kind of our point of view into the teenage characters in the first two films, and she's a young adult here. She's working as, I think she's an RN in this one. She's just kind of there to be the love interest to Corey. She doesn't really have that much agency as a character. She's just kind of there. And they have, the whole arc of the film is Corey's kind of descent into darkness and his struggle with, do I become the monster everybody's already painted me out as? That's kind of a fascinating character arc idea, but they don't go all in on it. But even if they did, I don't know that this movie was the appropriate avenue for something like this, because if you're doing the culmination of a trilogy, it almost feels like these movies were made out of order. Like, Halloween and Kills should have been the first one, where it's this giant killing spree that leaves its mark on its town. and everybody projects the idea of this killer onto this kid, and it drives him to the point where he becomes the monster they say he is. And then you have the original Halloween, where it's this final giant confrontation where Laurie's like full Rambo Home Alone mode. It's a very disjointed trilogy at the end of the day, because the first two take place on the same night, and then the second one take place so much farther later that it's like it doesn't even feel connected. Sure, you have like townspeople coming up to Laurie to yell at her, which I thought was kind of a contrived way of showing just how traumatized the people of this town are, but whatever, it gets the point across. But you also have like Laurie's daughter dying at the end of the second film, and that you never even hear the daughter's name in this movie. You never see the acknowledgement of the toll this has taken on their family, just because so much time has passed. But at the same time, the actors are all pretty good for the most part, and a genuine point that the creators are trying to make, and they took some risks in going the direction that they did with this film. Not necessarily in like a Halloween 3 kind of way, but just in the sense that they didn't just want to do the same slasher over and over again. And for that, I can't help but respect this movie even a little bit, because Corey's a very interesting character. You find yourself rooting for him, and even though some of the situations and characters are just cartoonish and over the top and contrived, like he gets beaten up by he's a 24-year-old kid getting beaten up by like 17-year-old. They're not even jocks, even though one of them's wearing a Letterman jacket. They're all in like the marching band, but it's to the point where they beat him up and throw him over the side of a bridge. It's just like, this movie doesn't really know how to make its point by doing anything other than like sledgehammering it. If they were gonna go this direction, I think one of the things they should have done is just build up the relationship between Corey and Laurie a little bit more, because Laurie's whole relationship to him is, I tried to help you, but you turned evil, so you must be put down. I think they needed to flesh out his arc a little bit more, because he goes from point A to B to C to Z. And so I think there's a bunch of in-between stuff that we're missing, and because there's a bunch of in-between stuff, they just kind of trauma dump on the character as a way of explaining why he acts the way that he does later on in the film. But even then, that takes out Allyson, who has up until this point been one of the main characters of the series. And so I think there's a space in this series for this character to exist, and for the idea of like this evil being passed on from one to the next to exist, because we saw something like this with Halloween 4. And one of the reasons, if you saw my review of that, by the way, why I love that film so much is that they did something very ballsy at the end and had the little 9-year-old girl killing her grandmother, or like her stepmother. And so it kind of reminded me of that, but the series backed out at the last minute on that twist, and it feels like they didn't quite go all in on this one. And so I'm just kind of left with a very, very mixed bag. It's not a terrible movie. It's very well made. It's well directed. I think the pacing is really where these storylines hurt. It really just feels like the Corey snapping storyline almost comes from a completely different script. So I think this story would have been a lot better had this character appeared sooner than he did, because he takes up so much screen time, and he's the only character whose decisions and actions are driving the plot. Michael Myers doesn't even do anything. He's living in a sewer until Corey starts feeding people to him, basically. So like, Allison's just kind of there, Laurie's just kind of there, Michael's just kind of there, and it's just so weird to see these characters like not even being reactive, just doing nothing for large swaths of time. I will say the end is decent, where you see Laurie finally emotionally move on, you see Allison finally emotionally move on, you see them kill Michael very violently, and then they say, and everybody's like, is he dead? And then Allison says, not dead enough. And so they fucking throw his body into a meat grinder. Not only do they stab him and slit his wrists and then slit his throat, they fucking grind his body into a pulp. And I thought that was like kind of a fun little nod at, yeah, the killer's not dead, except this time the characters know it, so they're not that stupid. And so, long story short, I think this movie has a lot going for it, but I think it's just a little too uneven with its presentation of these ideas, and these ideas are oftentimes very much at odds with each other. That doesn't And that's why, ultimately, again, it's a yellow light for me. It's not horrible, but I don't think it quite succeeds in what it sets out to do. But even said that, I respect the hell out of Gordon Green and everybody behind this, just for taking the risk that they did. All right, so that's my Halloween Ends review, and if you like what I have to say about this, or if you're curious as to what I thought about some of the other movies in this franchise, we've covered most of the movies in the franchise, and so check them out. We have Return of the Show, where we're covering Rings of Power, we're covering Housing Complex C, and we might be covering some other shows for between now and the end of the year. I have another video coming out, we have more live streams coming out. Like, comment, subscribe, and hey, it's Full Stop Reviews.